COVID-19, we have some new meeting protocols in place for the 2020 interim session. Remote access will be allowed to all meetings for the interim. Members will provide the information prior to the meeting on how to access the meeting remotely. The meeting materials were put online earlier this week and made available for downloading. At this time, we'll have Amy call the roll. Members, please need to indicate whether you are present in person, remote from home, or remote from your annex office. Amy?
Senator Embry,
Present.
Senator Neal, Senator Turner,
Here.
Senator Wilson,
Here.
Representative Banta,
Here.
Representative Bojanowski,
Here.
Representative Bridges,
Here.
Representative Fisher, Representative Flood, Representative Glenn,
Representative Flood is here and at home. Is present and at home.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Howard,
Here.
Representative Massey, Representative McCool,
Here.
Representative Rothenberger,
Present, I'm sorry.
Representative Scott, Senator Humphreys, Senator McDaniel, Representative Huff, Representative Reed, Representative Rudy, Senator Kerr, Representative Tipton,
Present in person.
Chair Riley.
Here.
Senator Neal is here at home.
Thank you.
All right, this morning we're going to hear from the Department of Education regarding budget cuts that are being made by both KDE and local school districts due to COVID-19's impact on the economy. Both the tangible cuts we know of for fiscal year 20, based on the updated CFG forecast, and the preparation being made for fiscal year 21, because we expect to see a shortfall in fiscal year 21 once receipts begin coming in. Members, please hold your questions until after the presentation. If you're participating remotely, please email me or subcommittee staff with your questions, and we will make sure to check with you again once all questions have been asked by the participants here in room 154. With that said, Robin and Charlie, please identify yourselves for the record and begin your presentation.
Good morning. My name is Robin Kinney. I'm the Associate Commissioner in the Office of Finance and Operations at the Kentucky Department of Education.
And I'm Charlie Harmon. I'm the Budget Director at the Department of Education.
Thank you so much for having us here today. We really appreciate the opportunity to appear before you. We had a pretty extensive invitation and presentation that we did to the Interim Education Committee yesterday. So we are going to narrow our conversations to those that were identified by Chair Riley today. But of course, if you have any questions about anything else, Charlie and I'll do our best to answer. I'm going to turn it over to Charlie first, and he's going to walk us through kind of what's been happening at the Department of Education as we together try to maneuver through the revenue impacts of the coronavirus, what's been happening at the department, our reduction that was requested for this fiscal year, and as we look forward to the next fiscal year, the impact on both the Department of Education and on local school districts.
Thank you, Robin. Good morning, committee. Chair Riley. As the chair mentioned, we had 3 questions that we needed to address. The first question being the current year shortfall for FY20. In general, we had a request for 1% of our general fund budget request. But the good thing about this is SEEK was exempted and school district health insurance was exempted. So we took a 1% on the remainder of our budget, which exempting a $3 billion SEEK program is very great for the Department of Education's local school districts and the school district health insurance. So that helped us a lot. So, but when you're taking such a cut late in the year, it's not 1%, it's kind of 12.5% because we got this request, middle of May. So when we're scrambling around trying to find money, for us, it was just a little over $3 million, which is a lot of money. $3 million is a lot of money. We were very fortunate that we had some savings due to COVID-19. We have around 300 central office Frankfurt-based employees and around 1,000 total because we have a little over 600 in our area technology centers, 53 area technology centers across the state. And we have about couple hundred at KSB and KSD together. So the positives happened for us where when COVID hit and both of our state schools were closed, all the school districts were closed, we saved some money in operating expenses, just the practical operating expenses that we were very fortunate to have. And we also had some travel. You know, we always have about 100 people on the road a day in our department. And now we're having about one person on the road a day. It's really, our interim Commissioner Brown is taking it very seriously. And we're all working from home, and it's actually working. We're doing a good job for the circumstance we're put under, which benefit, and we're saving a little money in travel and our operating expenses. So we were very fortunate that when we had to take this cut, it was limited to central office and didn't have to affect our state schools, our area technology centers, or local school districts. So that was a really big bonus for us. Although losing $3 million isn't easy, there were things we could have spent that on, for the school districts, but in this case, we didn't have to take personnel cuts or other cuts to affect districts. For FY21, it's just a big giant question mark. The consensus forecast group made official recommendations to revise FY20. They did not take an official action in 21, although they issued new forecasts, and they're not looking good. It looks like we'll be at least 6 months into FY21 before the revenue starts to stabilize. So for KDE proper, we're trying to prepare for that in several ways. One, we've got a list of programs here. We've got standards development, industry certifications, turnaround audits, support for our comprehensive, our schools being CSI, and our school report card. Those are all programs that we have that are going on that are either new or under improvement. Okay, that costs money that we don't really have a specific appropriation for. So we're still trying to scramble to accomplish that. Those are going to be kind of being held on hold for a while, depending on what's going on with state revenues. And always number one on our we don't have any money case is KSB and KSD, the Kentucky School for the Blind in Louisville and the Kentucky School for the Deaf in Danville. Those schools for years have been underfunded, and this is going to be tough for them if we have to take cuts at the state level. They are 100% state funded. They get just a teeny bit of special education money, like $10,000 or so, not very much at all. But those will be directly impacted. It'll be very difficult for those schools because they're already in tight situation. And of course, at the department, we'll take a hard look at staffing if we have problems, and we'll do the best we can not to affect school districts if we have cuts to make in 21, which I definitely think we will, but I don't know the magnitude at this point in time. As we've said over the years, we've had funding issues. We've taken cuts since 07, I think, and we had 1 or 2 good years since then when we had House Bill. I think it was House Bill, the FY17-18 budget. We got a little bit of an increase there, which was really good for the department and school districts. But once again, we had to take cuts in the next one, so it kind of ebbs and flows for us. One thing that's not on the slide, but that we do have real concern about is local tax revenues as well for school districts. They get a lot of their taxes from their local property taxes and property taxes. Although they're pretty steady, they're definitely not rising at the 2% and 3% rate that we had hoped. And we do have a few districts that get taxes from other employment taxes and a few other inventory taxes. And we do not expect those to increase at all. We expect those to go down. So we're going to take a cut at the state level probably have to impact school districts, and they're going to be taking have a revenue shortfall from their local funds too. So it's gonna kind of hit them, pretty hard. We haven't, had significant issues yet, but they're all anticipating it, and trying to plan. We've been having weekly or bi-weekly superintendent, webinars, and we've been covering everything from staffing to planning to transportation, everything that affects school districts and how, we can support them. Robin's got a little bit of good news to talk about on the funding. I don't know how she got that.
I think we'll take any good news.
So I think what Charlie is referencing is the CARES Act funding. That is funding from the federal government. The CARES Act, you've probably heard a lot about in the media because it impacts so many different agencies in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. But the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, I'm really going to focus on two pots of money that are related to education. And if I can just verify that we are on the CARES Act slide. Is that the one that we're on? Okay, because I can't see that from where I'm sitting. Thank you. There are two pots of money that I'm really going to focus on and share with you how we've guided school districts. It's really important that both pots of these money really allow for flexibility for school districts to determine how they best can utilize these funds to meet their community needs. The first one is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, and of course we have to shorten everything with an acronym, so we call that ESSER. ESSER is about $193 million that are coming to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. It is being allocated pursuant to the Title I-A formula. So that is only the kind of the method of distribution that is contained in the CARES Act, and we are directed that that is how districts will receive that allocation. So when people were talking about, and we were trying to prepare districts for planning purposes, we told them that if you think about it, it'll be about 80 to 85% of what you typically receive from your Title I appropriation. That allowed them to kind of be thinking about how much money they might receive. There are broad permissible uses under the ESSER funds. So you can use it for anything that is already permissible and eligible under the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. So that contains all of your title programs that you typically think about. So you can use these dollars for anything under that. Perkins, IDEA for those special population groups, McKinney-Vento that focuses on homeless, and then also a broad category that I would classify as kind of Corona or COVID related type expenditures. So anything that districts are incurring now that they didn't have before as a result of the coronavirus. So additional cleaning that needs to happen, purchase of PPE for both students and staff, anything that is related to coronavirus. Again, very broad, and districts have the ability to kind of determine what that is going to look like. In order to, I will compliment the U.S. Department of Education on the funding for education through the CARES Act, because they made the process as simple as possible. Typically, when we are applying for federal funds, it takes more effort on the part of the department and more time to get it together. I think them understanding the need for expediency in this matter, they did a very simple application for us. It was literally, we were checking boxes. Do you need this? And so I will commend them for making sure that we could get access to funds as quickly as possible. That application has already been approved for ESSER, and we have posted the allocations on our federal grants website through Charlie's office, so that districts can see exactly how much will be coming to them. From the school district side, we wanted to kind of mimic that ease of trying to make sure that it was available and accessible. So what we asked districts to do was to fill out an assurance document. They are very familiar with assurance documents. It's more along the lines of you promise to do X, Y, and Z. And those requirements very much tied to federal requirements that they are used to seeing. We did not require them to go in front of their local boards and seek that approval to apply. But of course, anytime that districts are receiving funds from the federal government or the state, they need to have their local school boards involved and aware of funds that are available to them. So we asked them to make sure that was happening. So as of now, I think we have about 5 districts that have actually have already received funds associated with ESSER. One thing about ESSER and the GEARS money that I'll talk about next is they could go back to expenditures back to March 13th. So March 13th was the date of the National Declaration of Emergency. And so districts started expending dollars that they needed to expend in anticipation of keeping their districts going. And so they can go back to that date for eligible expenditures. And so we've had about 5 districts that have already received funds for about, I think, a little more than $800,000. We have encouraged districts to be thoughtful because, as we know with federal funds, this is a one-time, as far as we know right now. And so they will have lots of expenditures, and they do need to be thoughtful and careful about their planning as it relates to their needs across their school district. The other pot of money, the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or GEAR, about $43 million coming to the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Of that amount, about $30 million will be allocated to local school districts. The GEARS funding came to the Commonwealth, as it did to other states, with the governor having some discretion on how that would be allocated. And so the $30 million is coming to local school districts. The balance is actually going to the institutes of higher education for other educational purposes. Very appreciative that the governor provided this additional funds for local school districts. And we kind of determined as a Commonwealth, we saw 2 really uprising needs that we continually have heard across our school districts. So GEARS funds, although there is flexibility, we have guided districts to use these funds in 2 kind of large pots. One pot would be for remote learning and technology, because we see so much the need, we believe, to continue to operate in some form or fashion for remote learning for the next school year. We don't really know what that's going to look like yet, but we see that as an ongoing need. Whether districts start that way and continue from a remote learning standpoint or have to go in and out of remote learning, technology, instructional coaches on how we can improve our instruction delivery through remote learning, anything that is broadly related to remote learning would be available, as well as if districts need to continue to improve the numbers of their technology devices. And so very broad uses in the technology area. The other area that GEARS money may be used for is for continuation of needs related to food service. Food service has been really, really important when it comes to continuation of learning for our students. If you see on the national level, we are seeing as a nation unprecedented amounts of people that really need access to food. Our food banks across the country are really being hit by people that have never really had to rely upon that community support for food and nutrition. And so our school districts really have stepped up to the plate in making sure, even in our time of NTI and remote learning, that nutritious meals are continuing to be served. And so we really commend the efforts of our school districts. In March, when we were kind of halfway in and halfway out of our NTI experience, our district served over 4.6 million meals to students in Kentucky. And in April, when we were completely NTI, that rose to over 11 million meals. I mean, you see the impact and the need for us to support nutrition at this very, very critical time. And we're heading into the summer area. Officially, I guess we're in summer now when we talk about school. And even though school has kind of ended for the year, the need for food doesn't stop. And so we continue to encourage, to the extent that districts can do, that they continue to provide that service. And I'm going to pause for just a minute because, refer to the chair. I see some questions, but would you like me to keep on
Just keep on
continuing?
going with it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So, these funds will, of course, be available, and districts will have that flexibility. We will ask districts in both of these pots of money to report back to, the department what we are calling a spending plan. It's not a budget, but it is a indication, by June 30th, so they can share with us kind of their, intentions at this point in time on how they would expend their dollars. We think that will be useful as we continue to inform the General Assembly of how districts are looking at this money, and also help us to advocate for additional funds if that's, if that's appropriate as we move forward. We did put on this slide a reference to ARA funds, just to kind of put a little bit of context to what education received here in Kentucky under the ARA funding back in 2009, and you'll see that was an $800 million number as compared to about a $225 million under the CARES Act. So we only put that on there for context purposes, so you can see the efforts that were done back in 2009 as compared to where we are right now for funding from the federal government. Okay, next slide. Mine are somehow out of order, I apologize. The other thing, of course, that we were asked to talk about is to talk about the COVID-19 impact on districts, and as we look forward into the next school year and really continuation of efforts over the summer, we do see increased cost needs that are necessarily going to need to be incurred by districts. Sanitation and cleaning, of course, as we all in our personal lives and our business lives are faced with new requirements for sanitation and cleaning. We're talking about whether that be buildings or buses, high touch areas, when we think of all the things that you touch when you're in a school building as well as in your own personal life. Doors, water fountains, stair rails, desks, all those things being touched by numbers of students if they are in person in the building. And that's an increased frequency that will be needed for that cleaning as well. So increase in the amount of supplies, the time being spent on cleanliness, and the areas that are being touched. Personal protective equipment, PPE, masks, gloves, thermometers for both students and staffs. Of course, the recommendation, just as we came here for the meeting today, people are wearing their own masks, and that is very much appreciated. But we know that there will be, if we are conducting in-person instruction, there will be either students or staff that either don't have the availability of a mask for that personal protection, and so districts will be incurring costs to have masks available for their students and their staff. The model of instruction delivery, that's a really big unknown at this point. I think a lot of it is dependent upon, as we get closer to school, what the coronavirus and the impact on the coronavirus is actually yielding at that time. But the issue for local school districts right now is they need to make decisions now. By now, they would have already known exactly what their next school year is going to look like. They would have already known what their budget looks like. They would already have their calendar set. So the department did grant a waiver to extend the ability of local school districts to submit their calendar as late as July 31st, because again, we want to afford that maximum flexibility to school districts, but they have to be having those conversations with their communities and with each other right now. I think we've all been in a situation where you think you have a really great plan, and if people don't buy into the plan, then it becomes more difficult, even though you thought it was a really good plan. So we're encouraging local school districts to talk to their communities. We have some that are actually doing surveys of their parents and their staff and their communities to inquire about, what about coming back in person? How do you feel about that? We're going to have a lot of parents that may be reluctant to send their children to school in person. We will also have some parents that are ready to send their kids back to school. So districts are going to have to really prepare for what that looks like. And we have encouraged them to almost develop a playbook. So you may have the best of intentions of starting out one way, and then whether we have a spike in the coronavirus, it may cause you to go to a different type of look. As well as if things get better, you may have a different type of look. So districts are in a very challenging situation, and I think what we are trying to afford them is as much flexibility as possible to make those really hard decisions. And based upon the model of instruction that they choose, whether it's technology, they may need to beef that up. We continue to be concerned about opportunity and access, so that all of our students have the same opportunity and access. We still have students that do not have the same internet capability at their homes. And so we do have many school districts that continue to have to rely upon paper and pencil for instruction of delivery. That is not ideal. It's not the best way to do it, but we do have districts in that situation. So increased costs for delivering, preparation of those packets and materials that need to go out the door. Transportation, really big, important issue for local school districts. They rely upon the ability to transport students to even have in-person instruction. And we were actually on a superintendent's call yesterday talking with the Department for Public Health. Our relationship with the Department of Public Health has become very close over the last month or so, as we are trying to find a balance in making sure that we can continue to deliver instruction in the best way possible, but still being respectful of the difficult situation public health finds us all in, and the guidance that they have to deliver to us. So we are constantly talking to each other about how can we do this safely, how can we mitigate risk. I think as opening any environment to numbers of people, whether it be our schools or our businesses or anywhere else, we will continue to have people that get sick. And so that's just a reality, just like in the school districts. And I don't want to make a pure comparison to the flu, but we do have, students that come to school and kids that get sick at school during the flu season. And so we will have this, but how do we find that balance to make sure that we can really conduct that instruction in the best way possible, but being respectful of the public health needs. And of course, implementing effective social distancing. We talk about that a lot. We're all conducting ourselves in that manner today, and so the operational needs of a school district, just logistically to make that happen, is very difficult. We talk about classrooms and the number of kids we typically see in a classroom and how close desks are together. And now, we need to move to a different type of look. Less children in the classroom, desks further apart. How does that work? Do we have enough space? Really difficult planning decisions. We talked a little bit about food service, and I only want to mention again, it's not on the slide, but the food service costs associated with food service, the way the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is where school districts receive their funding reimbursement for food, is based upon a premise of the number of meals and then a rate associated with it. So it's not a reimbursement for actual expenditures. So I think that's really important for us to all be aware of, because when you're talking about a breakfast amount of $2 and something and a lunch amount of $3 and something, and the number of students that you're trying to feed under a remote model, you may have additional expenses associated with that. Many districts utilize their bus drivers and their buses to deliver meals to get to those students. And while those costs are eligible costs, we can use our food service money to reimburse that. It's an extra cost, and the rate of reimbursement stays the same. So we've got districts who perform very, very admirably but they're gonna have an expended amount, they're gonna have amounts that are not reimbursed under that. So that's a good part of the CARES Act and being able to utilize that. It remains to be seen if it will be enough, because it's gonna, if we keep on keeping on and we have to use this model, to deliver our instruction, it becomes challenging. Charlie had mentioned that we do provide a lot of guidance to local school districts. Every Tuesday for 2 hours, we conduct a superintendent's webcast, and all superintendents, and we've had finance officers on there periodically as well, because the importance of the funding decisions that need to be made. Those happen every Tuesday for 2 hours. We also have an education task force that is put together, that the commissioner put together. These are sort of like our interested partners, all of the K groups that we rely upon, as well as educational cooperatives, the Center for School Safety, KHSAA, all of those types of partners that are really interested in school districts and the operations of school districts. So we meet with them very regularly. Those are every other week now. And the other group that the commissioner has engaged as far as frequency of timing, kind of pick that up a little bit, is the Superintendent's Advisory Council. And so the weeks that the Education Task Force is not meeting, then we'll have Superintendent's Advisory Council meeting. I've also mentioned the Department for Public Health, and we've had them on a couple of our superintendent's webcasts, because districts are really seeking that clarity about what are the, I will say, the minimums to get us back into the door, and then the rest of the guidance on, best practices or other opportunities really to continue to mitigate the risk. And so we've worked very closely with them. The other areas that we continue to provide guidance and seek input from are our advisory councils. And so we have several advisory councils that it's really important to hear their voice. That's, we have a special ed advisory council, always trying to think of the unique needs of that population. A parents advisory council, talking to parents and families, and a student advisory council. We've learned so much from our student advisory council. Really specifically, I would say some of the things that they bring to the table is their unique perspective as a student during this time, and how people are faring, their classmates and peers on the social and emotional front. And we see that as a huge need going forward. Everyone's going to come back to school, whatever that looks like, with a very different perspective. And we continue to have our counselor, Dr. Damian Sweeney, supporting those efforts. I think the only other thing that, it's sort of like, let's talk about the elephant in the room, and I would share with you a little bit about SEEK. Districts are very interested at this point in time, really, about all the funding that is going to be available. And I would extend my appreciation to the General Assembly with Senate Bill 177, which really allowed us to get through the last school year as best we could. And part of that is the allowance of really giving flexibility for additional NTI days, which was needed and we expect will be needed in the future. And then the other part is trying to kind of grapple with that attendance issue and funding to kind of close out the year. Because as we look forward, as many of you know, SEEK is funded on a look back. So we look back to the year before when we're talking about attendance and what happened with the attendance and all the other things, transportation and special ed populations, home hospital, all those subcategories. So we are always looking a year back when we're determining the amounts for the next school year. And as we got to the end of this school year, of course, we realized our attendance was going to look crazy, first of all. And our statutes right now are really designed under this thought that we're going to be in person in a seat in a school building most of the time. It's based upon attendance, either a half day or a full day. And we can come up with an average daily attendance fairly easily that way. when we go to an NTI instruction, we don't have that in-person, child sitting in a seat. And so that's one of the things that we're grappling with. But what the General Assembly did with Senate Bill 177 last year, which allowed us to really have a little level of certainty for funding for this year, was you all passed legislation that said, okay, we know the end of the school year is upside down right now, and you gave districts the flexibility of saying, I'm either going to look at my data from the previous year, or if I need to, we'll work with the department and use it for this year that we're finishing. And most districts, we've had all districts reply to us about what data that they wanted to use, and we had 14 districts that chose to use this school year's data, finishing out this school year, and use that data for their funding for next year. The rest of them, out of our 172 districts, chose to use the more certainty of that last year data, the 18-19 data. So that really helped us at the department to be able to kind of know what data we were looking at, and allowed us, as we move forward, to give a little bit of predictability for the school year upcoming. Of course, that is to say, before, as Charlie mentioned, if we get into any budget reductions, of course, that adds a whole nother level of complexity on top of it. But at least it gives districts a little bit of predictability, I would say, for this school year. So let's fast forward to as we start the new school year. As we start the new school year, we have even a higher level of unpredictability of what school's going to look like. We have it for a longer period of time. We're going to have it likely for the whole school year. And so when you talk, we are already looking forward to the next year's funding. What would that look like? And so we are having those discussions. We are having seeking input and feedback from our local school districts and finance officers, because again, they know what's happening for this school year, but we're already looking to the next one. So we will continue those discussions and keep you informed of decisions that, or kind of guidance that we're issuing for the next school year. And then finally, to Charlie's point about revenue, when we talk about collections for local school districts, of course, all of you are very aware of the consensus forecasting group and thinking about, it's not going to look the way we all thought. One thing I would urge us to keep in mind when it comes to local school districts, in addition to just that level of funding, is collections. Collections, so important in local school districts. And I hate to reflect back to the issue that we had not too long ago about unmined coal. And, that was something that happened in the middle of the year, and, we were trying to all react to that. But reductions in local revenues and what that looks like, it's really hard for districts to respond to very quickly. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I would be concerned about what level of collections. We have unprecedented numbers of unemployment, people that even though they want to pay, they just may not be able to pay. So I think that's another thing that we just need to collectively keep on our horizon as we think about what the next year might look like. I think that ends my prepared remarks, and we are happy to try to answer any questions, Chair Riley.
Thank you, Rob and Charlie, for your presentation. I don't envy you, and everyone else in the state has to make decisions regarding a lot of issues, and primarily the one we're talking about today, education. For those members with questions, we'll take questions from the members here in the room first. And I think right now we have Senator Embry has a question.
Yes. I have a county in my district, Muhlenberg County, that was hard hit by the decline of the coal industry. They had to release, had to cut salaries or release some staff. Now, their main source of income was from TVA, and they have lost the majority of those funds, which means that will affect their budget by 13%. 13% is devastating to their budget. I don't know, they're looking at more staff actions, maybe even closing a school, combining it with another one, which would be hard to do with social distancing and so forth. And they have already taken efforts to raise other revenue, and at this time, with so many people out of work and businesses closed, it's hard to take more money on the local level, so they're really up against it. I assume, of course, you communicated these two sources, state and federal, to all the school districts. They would be eligible to try to use some of those funds to help them, is that right?
They absolutely can use those funds for the eligible purposes. Of course, by using those funds in the areas that are eligible, that may free up money for them from another source to be able to address some of those concerns. You're absolutely right. Reductions overall, and for some school districts, we've seen loss in enrollment as well, and so that always impacts their revenues as well. So a very difficult time for school districts right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Tipton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a lot of notes and a lot of questions, but I'll try and condense them as best possible. Rob and Charles, appreciate you being here today. You're all in a difficult position like all of us are. A couple of questions on the ESSER funds. Two-part question. When will the school districts actually receive those dollars at the local level? And could you refer back to that website that we could go back and look at the actual distribution to each school district?
Sure. Charlie can send the actual location of the web link to Chuck and make sure that we get it distributed to all your membership.
Thank you.
As far as when they can access, federal funds, typically you expend your dollars and then you ask for a federal cash reimbursement. So for the ESSER funds, that process is already available and open. If you are a district that had already expended some dollars that are permissible for expenditure under ESSER, then we have already received some of those federal cash requests. So we have 5 districts that have actually received funds already. So they just need to make that federal cash request and we turn that around. So those funds are available. For the GEARS fund, which is the smaller pot of money, we're still working through a few things. Those come into the cabinet itself, and then the cabinet actually makes it available because it's going to 2 different places. It's going some to the Department of Education to disperse to districts, and the rest is going to the Institutes of Higher Education. So they are in the process of setting up the account so that we can access those very quickly too.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, a follow-up additional question, please. And this deals with the issue of local tax revenues, local revenues. I think you're absolutely right. We're going to see delayed payments on property tax. We're probably going to see more delinquent property taxes. It's going to be an issue for every taxing entity out here. You mentioned you project like to see a 2 to 3% increase. I know there is a big difference in school taxing rates. Some ask for the 4%. Some.
Yeah.
Could you all just let us? Is there a way we can find out just what each local school district has done in regard to taking the 4% compensating the last few years, just so we have an idea what local school districts are doing?
Absolutely. We take those in front of the Kentucky Board of Education, the tax rates that each district does. So we have even historical information back maybe 10 years that we can make available to you. We'll make that available also to Chuck. So you can see what your individual districts have done over the years, whether it's compensating or 4% or other, or but we certainly have that information and can make it available.
One more, I'll make it my last.
We will indulge you one more time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, I'll remember you next month when you have a bunch of questions. Talking about our funding model. Of course, we've had to make some adjustments. I've heard a lot of people ask the question, is it time for us to take a hard look and evaluate our funding model for school funding? Is it time for us to look into that? Because I know most people probably couldn't even explain the SIG formula to you.
Yeah.
Is it time for us maybe to take a hard look at that and especially in light of this changing world that we're in and how we fund local school districts?
I think it is time to take a look from the perspective of, it's always good to look at anything that's been around for a while. And SEEK, our model, has had very few changes to it over the years. I do say, as we reach out to other states, and certainly not in this environment that we're in right now, but we continue to receive kind of comments from other states that we have the right components to SEEK. The things we're looking at are things that should be included. I would never encourage us to make very drastic changes during a pandemic, but I think it is time for us to think about different ways to address it for the future. It is a complicated formula. I even think of myself as a continuing learning scholar of SEEK. Every day I learn something new about it. There are very few that really, really understand and appreciate all the intricacies of SEEK. We are very lucky that we have a few of those at the department. But I think it is always fair to look at anything that's been around for a significant period of time.
Thank you, sir. Representative Mojanowski.
Thank you. So my question has to do with a couple of articles I've read by discussing Education Secretary Betsy DeVos's intent on some of the CARES Act money to be appropriated to private schools. I'm referring specifically to an article in the New York Times on May 15th that stated that she directed school districts to share millions of dollars designated for low-income students with wealthy private schools. So my question is do we have to pay any percentage of our dollars that we receive to private schools? What percentage would it be? And or was our amount available reduced because of any payments to private schools?
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. So the letter that the representative is referring to really concerns equitable services. And equitable services and the provision of equitable services is required in many federal programs. Under the CARES Act, the way equitable services, and they have said equitable services does apply. So that kind of general concept of equitable services does apply. That does not mean that money goes to private schools, but there is and this is almost as complicated as SEEK, so I'm not going to get into the details because I'm not the person to really define what that looks like. But there is a model that our continuous improvement and support office at the Department of Education actually informs districts, and they work with them on equitable services and what that must look like. But again, it doesn't mean money, it means the value of services. So that is required under the CARES Act funding. There has been, some states have taken the position and have asked, we would rather not do equitable services under the CARES Act. And the other part about the CARES Act that is a little different in this circumstance is districts go through this process once a year, and they've already gone through this process for this year for equitable services. And the CARES Act and the position of USED is you have to reopen it for the CARES Act money. So you may have other private schools that typically don't participate and don't seek assistance under equitable services for the year. So you may have additional private schools that weren't already involved. And so the discussion is whether you have to reopen it, if there's more schools coming in. I will share with you that at the department, the continuous improvement and support folks have looked at, and they don't believe that it will be a significant heightened amount as they look across. But it is extra work for school districts to go back and go through that process again. We have sent out guidance on equitable services based upon the position of the U.S. Department of Education at this point in time. If that should change, because I think that is still being discussed, if that should change in any manner, what that would mean for local school districts is they would have gone through the process and determined the amount that they would have to provide in this equitable service environment. It would mean they get to pull back from that. So it's a very conservative approach right now. We follow that guidance. If it changed, then they would have less in equitable services that they have to provide to those private schools. So it's not really a money thing, it is a provision of services.
May I follow up? Okay, could you give an example? I mean, I do know in the special education world that all children are offered special education services. So beyond special education, what would be a specific service that may be provided?
I am probably not the best person to answer that question.
Special ed is the best
It
example.
is the best
Okay.
example.
And that one I'm very familiar
Other
with.
than that, yeah.
Okay, and just one follow-up? That has nothing to
I
do-
gave Representative 3, I think.
Okay, and this one is a different topic. How much money did we save, if any, by having the end-of-year accountability testing canceled?
Charlie, want to talk to that?
Yeah, so what happened is our contract with our vendor was around $12.5 million. And, the timing was the worst possible for that. Because they did all of their pre-work, getting ready to do that. And I know that our commissioner said yesterday in one of the webcasts that we literally had test documents on the dock ready to be shipped to districts. So we had to pay up to that point. What we saved, the money we didn't have to spend, was for the delivery, which is a significant amount of money, and for the analysis once those tests are taken, the scoring part. Okay, and scoring can be as easy as running numbers through a computer, or we also have some written things that have to be scored. So there's a cost there. Right now, we're still negotiating with the vendor on what the difference is, but we think it's going to be in the neighborhood of $3 million, $3.5 million. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Representative Rothenberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Commissioner, I'm going to kind of piggyback on where Representative Tipton had, talking about the revenue formulas. And one of my biggest concerns is, and I think you've already alluded to it, when we start going back to school and we look at our facilities, we know there's some changes we're going to have to make. We're going to have to space children out a little bit more and stuff like that. What I am concerned is there's also a transportation component, trying to get those kids back in school, and that doesn't allow as the flexibility as it does in a fixed facility to move people around. What I am concerned with, as school districts start to move forward and they start to hone their plans on how they're going to safely bring children back, and I think they can, I really do, is that local school districts aren't, because of the current formulas, the way it's set up, that they're not penalized. As a parent, I may be okay to send my child to school, but I don't know about putting them on a bus with 90 other students, where they're sitting face to face and right on top of each other. So I may decide just to drive them to school. Well, the local school district should not have to be penalized because the parent brings them and drops them off, and that's it. The other is you talked about non-traditional instruction, or NTI. Schools shouldn't be penalized there. That if there's a group of students that their parents decide to keep them home and keep them in the NTI program, that you're not penalized there for losing a lunch, losing transportation. I think that there's something legislatively that this body can do come January to hold harmless our local school districts to really, be innovative on the skills they use. I know I was listening on the radio the other day, the University of Notre Dame said they're going back to school in August. However, they're canceling fall break, and their finals will be the week before Thanksgiving, and then they'll be out until January. I thought that was pretty unique. Number one is kids love it because they're going to be home for all the holidays. But number two is it gives a nice break there, almost 2 months, for the University of Notre Dame to completely do a deep cleaning, help break that chain of the coronavirus, and also helps break the chain of the flu season that comes in there. So, school district's going to be very innovative. I think you all offer them the maximum flexibility, but I would recommend to my colleagues, which I won't be here in January, but that we do need to come back and make sure that our local school districts aren't being penalized for being innovative as it relates to non-traditional instruction, to lunches, to transportation, or other funding formulas that are going to be hurt. And I think that we can very easily do averages over the last few years that would minimize the damage at that point until we get through this pandemic. And then the last thing that I would throw out is that I think this is an opportunity. We passed this year to the school safety bill. And I think there's an opportunity to maybe maybe utilizing some of those funds, because this is a school safety issue. This is a public health issue that relates to our schools. maybe there's some way we can open up some dialogue and maybe utilize some of those funds for our school nurses or what, that, in schools that may not have that at that point, in order to do that. So, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for the opportunity, to address this body. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Representative Howard.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just had a question about, one of the things I'm having issues with when I talk to superintendents is they don't seem to know anything about whether or not they're gonna be able to play athletics, when school's actually gonna start, if you're gonna have a hybrid model, if you're gonna have a remote learning model, if you're gonna have a combination of both. How is Jefferson County different than Wolfe County? Do we actually have any drop dead date when we make final decisions about some of these issues?
So let me try to address some of those. For athletics, of course, I think as recently as the end of last week, the Kentucky High School Athletic Association, their Board of Control met and made some decisions about really summer activities. And they talked about the dead period, and I think they've waived the dead period. They've reopened and have put some dates in as far as the ability for student athletes to get back together for conditioning purposes for basketball and football, I think.
I think that date is June the 15th.
June 15th. And then that goes from June 15th until I think the 29th. And then after that, I think they're kind of in a wait and see pattern. They're reevaluating to see what happens, again, looking back to what is happening with the coronavirus at that time as we move forward. So I think there is perpetually guidance coming out. I think the thing to keep in mind, and what we continue to communicate to the Department of Public Health and others, is it's really important that we understand all the things that a local school district touches. Because school districts are more just about education, that of course is our primary challenge and concern, but we do so many other things in our local school districts. So when something rolls out about childcare, which, you know, there's been guidance already issued about childcare, we have childcare facilities in our local school districts. Youth sports activities, we have sports activities in our local school districts. So anytime we talked about something, I think there was something that was, I hope I'm not preempting, but there was something about fishing tournaments that was going to roll out. And I was like, wait a minute, we have fishing teams at our local school districts. So you have to, it's really an appreciation and elevation of all the things that local school districts do in the bigger world and the community. You have to appreciate and understand that as we roll out. So we are trying to provide as much guidance to local school districts without interfering with their flexibility, because it's really important. Like you said, Jefferson County is different than Wolfe County than Adair County. So we don't want to come out with a one-size-fits-all that doesn't work for their local community. But on our website, on the COVID-19 page, we are really broken down into three big areas: educate, feed, and support. And we have guidance for each of those areas, from everything about considerations on how to choose which model of your calendar works best for you, who to engage, make sure you have your nurses and your public health people at the table when you're having these conversations. So all that is out there. I think it's that tension that we feel between local school districts that really just want to say, tell us what to do, 1, 2, 3, and that balance and flexibility so that it works for your community. And I think superintendents have a really hard job right now because they're trying to meet both of those.
Thank you. Representative Banner?
Thank you. Has any thought been given? I know that we have 30 schools currently that might be not in crisis, but they've got people assigned to them that help them.
Yeah, so we have 51. I think there's 51 CSI schools.
Okay, so has any thought been given about kind of slowing down, backing off on that, maybe sending those people back to their own schools to teach till we normalize again?
So we really don't have a whole lot of flexibility there. There are state and federal requirements. All those schools are identified federally. And then, once they're identified, we have to provide supports A, B, C, and D to those schools. So our mechanism for doing that is taking, you know, highly effective teachers and putting them on contract, taking them from one county and sending them to a school in another county for support. And that's a great proven method, but in these times, it'd be great if those great teachers could be back in their own districts as well. I don't know that we have the flexibility to do that, though.
I think the other thing that I would say is, of course, those education professionals that come to us, it is through a voluntary process. So we don't just go pick somebody up from a school district and say, come work for us. We enter into a memorandum of agreements with those local school districts who have graciously given the time and talents of that individual to help with CSI schools.
I get to yeah, I realized you didn't like plug them or anything like that, and I appreciate it. I just don't know how, you can work with a school that might be doing NTI, that is, you know, there's just so many moving parts here. It just seems like we should at least ask for a reprieve, or it just doesn't make any sense to me to have these highly skilled people working with schools that may not even be in person, or they're worried about sanitizing and checking temperatures and oh yeah, you know, I've got to do this too. It just doesn't resonate with me. As an old principal, I'm just picturing all the balls in the air and then having someone come in and tell me what to do right while I'm trying to just have school.
Yeah.
So just something to think about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the group here? I don't think we have any remote questions either, do we? Okay.
I did put in a request, Chairman. I'm not sure I did it properly. It was through the chat system. I may not have used the proper communication tool there.
That's good, Representative Flo. We hear you now, so go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Chairman. If I will, my request was to make a comment and to ask a question. And the comment had, with several of my colleagues who've already spoken, Representative Rothberger mentioned the school safety funding is such a smart move at this moment to consider the nurses' dimension, the healthcare dimension of our way of being safe together. That is one thing COVID-19 has taught all of us. I know the underlying need for a healthcare frame as we move forward over the next 3 to 5 years in terms of getting a vaccine and we fully recovering. I see this as a real process over a period of time here. I want to affirm my colleague, Representative Tipton's suggestion that we take a hard look at the, perhaps I'm coming from the other side of the coin by first doing this to say that what's not complicated or hard to understand about the one reason why it's been successful is because it did take historically denied communities with power and voice, Black and brown children in our system, children with myriad mental or physical differing abilities, and needs that were poverty implications, and these were factored in so that our community, our entire state, this had a poor history, if you will, understands poverty's impact. This helped mitigate it. And the other thing that SPEAK did for 30 years was be stable. You will all appreciate it, as soon as you get many of us legislators in there attempting to change the formula, piecemeal, you can do damage to a system set up to hold this truth. So the one thing that SPEAK did well, I want to affirm, and I do think we need to take a deeper look in the days ahead about how is it continuing that tradition that matters to all of us and matters moving forward for justice and money, but how we also could strengthen what it means to live in the 21st century, which gets to the point around transportation and safety and NTI days. This is the new normal, I believe, moving forward in myriad ways, beyond even our physical well-being. Because it's technology we haven't had time to integrate like we do now finally devote the dollars. One last point, sir, is to ask this question. I believe the peers money. I was curious if the distribution is going of those dollars of the 30 million going to higher ed, which I was glad to hear. That what formula are we using to spread that out? Is that going to be in a when we've been modeling with some new dollars? Is it first time new dollars, 1 year only? Say a word more about that, please. Thank you, Chair.
Representative Flood, this is Robin. For the GEARS money, the department had the flexibility on how to determine allocation of those funds. The GEARS Act actually had a provision that we could, the governor could choose to determine that GEARS money could go to the most significantly impacted districts in our Commonwealth. And as we looked across the Commonwealth and saw that all of our districts really were impacted by the coronavirus, and they all kind of closed it for in-person instruction at the same time, and they were all having this similar challenges, maybe just to different degrees in volume, the Commonwealth of Kentucky took the position that we would make funds from GEARS available to every school district, rather than trying to determine who has been more significantly impacted than their neighbor district. And in doing that, we are allocating those funds again under the Title I formula. So we have a methodology that districts are familiar with, and that determines their allocation. So again, that does focus on socioeconomic backgrounds of your students, and a known quantity formula, easy for us to calculate and for districts to have confidence in what that looks like. So that's how we have allocated dollars from GEARS.
Representative Flood, this is Charlie
Point
Harmon.
of Thank you, Charlie. Please go ahead.
Yeah, both Representative Rothenberger and you had some questions about the school safety dollars.
Yeah.
I want to summarize that real quick. So in House Bill 352, we did get $18.2 million in our capital budget for school district facility upgrades related to the prior Senate Bill 1, the school safety bill. So we are working with our architectural team, some of Robin's staff, with school districts and the Kentucky Commission on School Safety on a method to distribute those funds to school districts. So that'll be happening coming up soon, probably July or August. They'll be getting those funds for that. And we also had $7.3 million with some really specific language in the budget bill for school-based mental health service providers. Okay, and the language there was that the Kentucky Commission on School Safety, in coordination with the state, what's that gentleman's title?
School Safety Marshal.
Yeah, School Safety Marshal. They worked together to come up with a mechanism, and I think at the April Kentucky School Safety Commission's board meeting, they voted to have an even distribution. So they were going to give $43,000 and some change to every school district to use for this purpose. So for a small district, that pays for almost for a salary for someone with these certifications to be in the school providing these social and emotional, medical maybe, service to the students. In a large district, it may provide, partial salary for a coordinator to work with multiple schools. So, but those were two nice pots of money for school districts in our budget this year, which will go to good use, I'm sure.
Thank you, Representative Flood. Any other questions? Rob and Charlie, we appreciate your presentation. We wish you wisdom and foresight in the coming months.
Thank you, Chair Riley. If I can also, I'd like to acknowledge, this is Charlie's last meeting with us. He has decided to become a gentleman farmer, and so his last days with the Department of Education are upcoming. He's leaving us at the end of June. He has had a long career in state government, over 30 years, working in the budget arena, and the department for the last 10 years has been lucky enough to have him as our budget director. He's done a wonderful job, wonderful colleague, and